murdered her entire family so that she could be with her 300-year-old werewolf boyfriend. And no, this is not the plot of Twilight, so buckle in, trigger warning. This is a wild, wild ride. Jasmine Richardson was 12 years old and could best be described as a happy, giggly, just normal child growing up. She had a younger brother and they lived in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada with their parents. That is until she met 24-year-old Jeremy, who would soon be her boyfriend and claimed to be a gothic 300-year-old werewolf. They met at a punk show. Jeremy wore a blood vial around his neck. He loved the taste of blood and convinced Jasmine to join vampirefreaks.com. Jasmine started to change and her aesthetic got darker and darker, and her family definitely noticed it, and when they found out about Jeremy, rightfully so, they grounded her and forbade her from seeing him. I would just like to point out that this is a very clear case of grooming and manipulation, and even though Jasmine still has some responsibility, or a lot of responsibility in what is about to happen in this story, I just want to put that clearly out there, because Jeremy was 24 years old and she was 12. Mark and Deborah Richardson did not realize that forbidding their daughter from seeing this menace of a human being, this horrendous person, was going to eventually be the death of them. Jasmine was actually the first one to hatch the plan when it came to killing her entire family, and she messaged Jeremy about it on vampirefreaks.com, saying that she had a plan and it involved killing her family and living with him, basically running away into his arms. Jeremy took a little bit of pleasure in this, it seems, and his response was that they needed to be more creative with her plan. And so over the next few days, they created a murder plan to kill her entire family, younger brother included. On April 22nd, 2006, Jasmine let Jeremy into her house, where he hid in the basement. Deborah heard a loud noise and went to go check it out. Jeremy stabbed her 12 times. Mark came rushing down to the basement after hearing his wife's screams and charged at Jeremy with a screwdriver, but he was no match. He was stabbed 24 times, and when he asked why, Jeremy responded with, "This is what your daughter wanted." And at that point, Mark stopped fighting and took his last breath. Upon seeing her dead family when Jeremy beckoned her forward, Jasmine hugged him and whispered something rather seductive into his ear. And this is when they went upstairs to kill her brother. Part 2 up right away. Murder your entire family, run away to live with your 300-year-old werewolf boyfriend. What could possibly go wrong? Oh, I don't know, he confesses. This is part 2 of the Richardson family massacre. At this point in the story, Jeremy and Jasmine have one target left: her 8-year-old brother. Jasmine decides to go upstairs and pretend to comfort her brother, but instead, they both murder him. The next morning, the crime scene was found by her brother's 6-year-old friend, who looked in through the window and saw bloody handprints and blood everywhere. He ran back to his family and they called 911. Jasmine wasn't considered a suspect until police opened her locker, thinking that she had been kidnapped and looking for any clues, and found a picture that she had drawn of her entire family and their house on fire. And they were like, well, this is suspicious. Maybe we should add her to the suspect list. And so they did. Jeremy and Jasmine were tracked 130 kilometers away from Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada, where they were promptly arrested and prosecuted. Jeremy actually confessed, not knowing that he was doing so. He bragged about the murders to his cellmate, who actually was an undercover cop. Jasmine was only sentenced to 10 years in prison because she was only 12, and she was actually the youngest person to be charged with multiple murder charges in Canada. So that's an interesting one. I don't know how to feel about that or this whole thing. In my opinion, something happened. Jasmine did not display these personality traits until she met Jeremy, who was 24 years old and 100% groomed and manipulated her. And maybe she had some underlying mental health concerns. Maybe she was just so completely manipulated by Jeremy. Or this was just her personality the whole time and he encouraged it. Nevertheless, she was released after 10 years, and I genuinely believe that she shouldn't have been sent to prison. I think that she should have gotten the insanity plea and been sent to an institution, but that's just my opinion. I think that there was some serious psychological damage there that needed to be addressed, And I'm not sure if it was, but I don't know. Do you guys agree with me? Let me know what you think in the comments, and let's talk about it.
In an act of vigilante justice, this woman killed the man who murdered her daughter in the middle of his trial. Growing up, Mary Ann Bachmeyer did not have it easy. She had placed 2 babies up for adoption by the age of 18. So by the time her third daughter, Anna, was born in 1973, she was ready to start over. She raised Anna as a single mom in Lübeck, Germany, and did everything she could to make her feel happy and loved. But on May 5th, 1980, when Anna was 7 years old, she skipped school after getting into a fight with her mom. She was then abducted by her neighbor, 35-year-old Klaus Grabowski, who was a convicted sex offender. Klaus had previously been arrested for sexually assaulting 2 other young girls and was voluntarily castrated in 1976, which was reportedly common back then in Germany to prevent offenders from reoffending. However, Klaus later underwent hormone therapy to try and reverse it, and this is important to remember. After abducting Anna, Klaus held her captive for several hours, reportedly sexually assaulted her, and eventually strangled her to death with a pair of his fiance's tights. He then put Anna into a cardboard box and left her on the bank of a canal. Klaus was arrested that night after his fiancée turned him in. After he was arrested, Klaus stated that he didn't intend to abuse her and that Anna, who was 7 years old, tried to seduce and extort him for money. He claimed to have panicked, and not wanting to go back to prison, he killed her. This obviously took a major toll on Mary Ann, whose young daughter's name was being dragged through the mud by this horrible man. So on March 6, 1981, on the 3rd day of Klaus's trial, Mary Ann snuck a .22 caliber pistol into the Lübeck District Court and shot him 7 times in the back, killing him almost instantly. Klaus's attorneys tried arguing that he'd only simply acted out due to a hormone imbalance caused by the hormone therapy after being castrated. During Mary Ann's trial for killing Klaus, a doctor who had examined her asked her for a handwriting sample in which Mary Ann wrote, quote, "I did it for you, Anna," end quote, surrounded by 7 hearts. Mary Ann was convicted of premeditated manslaughter in 1982 and sentenced to 6 years in prison, but she was later released after only serving 3. This became the most well-known case of vigilante justice in what was West Germany. In an interview 10 years later, Mary Ann stated that she shot Klaus after careful consideration and to prevent him from further spreading horrible lies about Anna. Mary Ann died on September 17, 1996 at just 46 years old from pancreatic cancer. She was buried right next to Anna.
Guess who we're talking about today? Mr. Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers in America, killing anywhere from 30 to 40 women from 1974 to 1978. Ted came off as this very charismatic, clean-cut, well-liked man. And he was a law student, so he was rarely suspected for the crimes he committed. Later, Bundy would say, "I'm the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet." And one of his lawyers said, "He is the very definition of heartless evil." Before murdering people, he would just assault females, mostly college women. Graphic details warning here. He would make them unconscious somehow, usually by bludgeoning them with a metal rod, then sexually assault them. And his first attack left the woman in a 10-day coma with permanent disabilities. Soon after he started killing people, he developed a technique which he would have a sling or crutches appearing disabled, which would draw in women because he would be like, "Hey, can you help me put these books in my car? I just need some help." And they would help him. And as soon as they would get close to his car, he would hit them in the head, knock them unconscious, handcuff them. He actually took out the passenger seat in his car so that they could lay on the ground without people seeing them. He would then bring them back home, sexually assault them, kill them, and dump the bodies somewhere. He would actually go back and visit the places he dumped the bodies because it was sacred. The land was sacred with his remains of people he killed. He would go back and have sex with the corpses again. Ew! He would also decapitate his victims and keep their skulls to sleep next to. All signs were pointing to him after many college women went missing, and he was first arrested for kidnapping and assaulting a woman. And for the first of 2 times, he escaped from custody. He jumped off a 2-story window and booked it to this cabin where he would continue to kill people. He was recaptured 6 days later. He then escaped from prison again by digging a hole up in the ceiling, and continued his spree. Now, he was caught again, obviously. In trial, he was taken in charge of his own defense, didn't need lawyers, but was ultimately convicted and placed on death row. There, he suffered abuse from fellow prisoners. Great, glad to hear that. And was finally executed by electric chair on January 21st, 1989. Now, we don't actually know, how many people he killed, but he's a monster. On her 10th birthday, this little girl, Victoria Martens, was murdered. And it gets a lot worse, so let's jump into it. Big trigger warning here. It is very disturbing. So, strap in, everyone. Victoria lived with her mother, Michelle, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She had no criminal history and dated men that attempted to kiss and also kidnap Victoria. And Michelle had called CPS 5 times prior to Victoria's killing, which is a red flag. And again, with these child abuse cases CPS just sucks. I hate to say it, but they didn't do anything. In July 2016, she met a man named Fabian Gonzalez, who was a regular methamphetamine user. He also told Michelle to not tell her parents about him. Big red flag. Very soon after they met, they moved in together. And while Michelle was at work and Victoria and the other kids were at school, Fabian would bring in other meth users into the home. And they would shoot up meth and party, go crazy, destroy shit, And on August 15th, Fabian's cousin, Jessica Kelly, was released from prison, and she was in and out of prison for a decade, and was also a regular methamphetamine user. Fabian invited her to move into the apartment with him and Michelle was unaware of this. Now, on her 10th birthday, Victoria's grandparents spoke to her for the last time over the phone, and that night there was a 911 call from the neighbors saying that there was a domestic disturbance and there was loud arguing from their apartment. At 4:30 a.m., the police arrive. Michelle and Fabian are seen outside of the apartment, both with huge gashes on their face, and Jessica is still inside the apartment. When asked to come out of the apartment, Jessica jumped off the balcony and fractured her ankle. Here is the very disturbing part. So, the police went inside to discover Victoria strangled, stabbed, partially wrapped in a sheet, and set on fire, and also dismembered. When detained, Michelle claimed that Victoria was induced with meth and given alcohol, and that she watched Jessica and Fabian sexually assault, strangle, stabbed, and dismember Victoria. 2 years later, this turned out to be false. And this is kind of all over the place, so I apologize. But apparently, Michelle and Fabian were at a different house the time that Victoria was murdered, she was murdered by Jessica. When they returned home, they were sitting in the car listening to music, where Jessica carried Victoria's body, saw them, and went back inside. And when Michelle and Fabian joined them inside, Jessica tells Fabian that she killed Victoria and didn't tell Michelle. Fabian told Michelle to make dinner and go to bed, and then Jessica and Fabian dismembered her, cleaned up the body or whatever. And then later, Jessica attacked Fabian and Michelle with an iron, hence the gashes on their face, and they left the apartment when the police arrived. After they left, Jessica set the body on fire and dipped off the balcony. After this, Michelle's murder charges were dropped and pleaded guilty to 1 count of reckless child abuse resulting in death, facing 12 to 15 years in prison. Jessica is spending 50 years in prison. Fabian was released.